In this episode, we cover a lot of ground, like hopper rooftops, the Ford hauler hauling, missing parts on a locomotive, a unique bird, the Hiawatha makes the cut, and Transformers.
Greetings.
I didn't know you had so much train stuff.
We take a look at grass, as well as trying to straighten things out.
And also check out what the curmudgeon's gripe of the week is this week. Only in this episode of SOO The Milwaukee Road.
Real fanning with Rivard to go.
Today we find ourselves in St. Paul with Minneapolis off in the distance. The train we're going to talk about today originates down here in the lower left, which is Pig's Eye Yard, former Milwaukee Road, then Sioux Line, then CP. The train would be the Ford hauler. It originates, works its way past St. Paul, goes up Short Line Hill, and at the top of Short Line Hill, there's a place called Fortson Junction. The train will split off to the left. The yard that you see down to the left is former Chicago Northwestern, now UP's Western Avenue yard. The train we're going to view here is actually going to be seen from right by this white building. We'll pivot around and get a look, kind of the viewpoint in which Bob is going to be viewing today, and it's going to be coming across kind of a trestle, and then it's going to work its way eventually up to the Ford plant. We're going to take a look at the variety of cars that are involved, but before we do, we want to touch on the power that's being used on the Ford hauler. In today's application that we're viewing, you're seeing a pair of MP15 ACs. Now you see one of them is red and white. There were very few painted in red and white. The Sioux Line never owned MP15 ACs. These were all Milwaukee Road units. It's kind of neat to be able to see these are running in tandem. As you'll notice, they're running nose to tail. Very common with Milwaukee Road MP15 ACs is seeing them running elephant style. Let's kick back and watch these guys roll by. Once they roll by, we'll pop in and take a look at some of the cars that are in the consist in a little while.
It's quiz time, quiz time, quiz time, quiz time, quiz time!
Over the years, the Twin Cities Assembly Plant has produced vehicles like the Model T, many others, including the Ford Ranger. Do you know which make or model was the 4 millionth built by Ford in Minnesota? Was it A, the 62 Galaxy, B, the 67 Fairline, C, the 77 LTD Landau, or D, the 85 Ranger? We'll find out later in this episode. Well, 982 had lost its antenna, and that's not a favorite thing.
Finding it is.
I didn't know you had so much train stuff.
Well, it's not all my stuff. This here is a Joe Binish custom-painted C415. It's a very cool item to see because, well, they don't make them. This is a resin shell that he had customized to be able to create what we see here. Now, I don't know all the nitty-gritty that goes into this. I do know he had to put his own drivetrain under it, as well as do a lot of his own details. Joe does a fine job, and it's definitely cool to see a 415 out there.
Yeah, they gave me this tunnel for having the mumps.
One thing that's kind of cool is an SDL39.
That's a given.
This is the scale trains, of course, but what's in tow?
A passenger car?
That's not normal.
Not in the Hiawatha Elevated District.
Well, I heard they hauled circus cars down there at one point.
Yeah, they did, but that's a whole nother story. What we're looking at here is Dave Voss's passenger car that he did some detail work on. As you can see here, he's got a nice interior. He's got class marker lights on the end. And a lot of detail that you're seeing here was done...
Not 10 years ago, not 20 years ago, not 30 years ago, not 40 years ago, 50 plus years ago.
Sorry, Dave. You are, I think, younger than I am, or at least you look like you are.
What we've got here is the passenger car that has rolled the rails of over 300 railroads. It's kind of cool because he's doing something that I had never seen done before, and that was bring a car with him to all the different railroads he operated at. As you can see here, he started logging these on 9/27/1973.
That was a little while ago.
As you can see here, this car has rolled the Allegheny Midland.
Tony Coster? Who's that guy?
We got all kinds of guys that are on this list. As I mentioned before, 300 plus that are on here, and I'm privileged and honored to be able to be the 332nd. Thanks for bringing it over, Dave, and thanks for operating.
And they gave me this freight car for having the measles.
Well, we can say our hobby is expensive, but at least we're not into robotics. Check this out.
Hey, Optimus Prime.
Greetings.
Transform.
Gee. How sick did you have to get this?
Hey, Optimus Prime.
Greetings.
Turn around.
No, I didn't have to get sick at all. My dad went down to the hobby shop to get a switch fixed, and he came back with this.
Hey, Optimus Prime.
Greetings.
Transform. Pretty cool.
When you take a look at the actual cost of these things, not going to be cheap. Either are model trains, but at the end of the day, model trains look cheap compared to these. You say, how much is this? Well, let's just take a look. This is the collector's edition, but $1 grand! Yeah, there are a few of them that are out there. If you want a discount, you can buy that Prime, just the regular edition for $700. These are a lot for what they are, but at the end of the day, other people have other interests. This just ain't mine, 'cause holy smokes.
Honey, I'd like to get the Optimus Prime trailer kit.
That's more than the robot.
That doesn't sound like your father.
Oh, he wasn't always grouchy, just since he went into business for himself.
Attempting.
To weather the prototype.
Here we have our PS4427, slightly re-weathered. We're going to apply that same technique that we had recently done on the hopper that's in the background there, and that's putting down a little bit of glue. We're going to use the mill tailings and create that look of spilt grain. Now that we've got our glue down, we're going to bring in the mill tailings to be able to apply, as I mentioned prior. It's Arizona Rock and Mineral mill tailings, makes for good spilt grain. Now that we spilt some grain, it's time to bring in the
Taco sauce.
We're using dark brown in this application.
Hold the phones, what's going on here? This is more messed up than a left-handed baseball bat. What is happening?
It looks like they're soiling grain. Can we not cue that music again? I meant no music.
Oh, we're just brushing it on, brushing it on. This is how we do it.
This is how we do it.
This is how we do it. We've got the soiled grain. I end up using a little miniature. This is a short buffalo grass. I use the spring because it's a brighter color, represents new growth. A lot of times when soiled grain ends up on the top of the roof of a car, the rain provides a little bit of moisture and you're going to start to get a little bit of growth. So I end up taking little pieces of this, if I can get a hold of it, and put it down onto the car. Now, I don't glue it in. These things do have self-adhesive on the backs of them, but I a lot of times tuck them into areas that they end up holding themselves. So as you can see here, we've got ourselves a little bit of new growth simply by just pulling off a few little small pieces of this miniature grass tufts.
This is how we do it.
For what little time it takes to be able to create this look, it's not too bad. It's kind of a nice little touch that you can put onto any freight car in a short amount of time. You ever look at some of the photos you take and wonder why they look a little funky or distorted? A lot of times it's because they are. The technology that we're using, it's great. Cell phones get us low down to the ground and give us a more realistic view, but they are using a fisheye lens, something that's distorting the view. It's actually warping our photo. Well, what do you do to get rid of that? In this case, I'm using Photoshop.
I don't have Photoshop.
And actually pull it out. The vertical lines in your photograph should be fairly vertical, meaning that the ribs on the car, they shouldn't be kind of barreling in or out. They should be going vertically up and down when you're this close to the object in real life. So what I'm doing is stretching that out. I'm pulling it up, trying to give myself the illusion of what it would look like more as a prototypical image. Seems like a subtle little trick, but at the end of the day, this ends up making things look a little bit more prototypical because you end up straightening things out. How do we draw attention to some of the details that we put into our models and our scenes? I would say you'd put the detail in by taking the background out. And that's what Pele Sobor has pointed out. I think this is a great way to do it. He's noted a Photoshop tool that
I don't have Photoshop.
you're able to knock out the sky, obviously replace it, give yourself different moods, different effects. And as you can see, those moods and effects change the scene, but make it more realistic. I don't think anybody needs to apologize for knocking out a background and putting in something that's more believable.
Like all forms of art, films have always relied heavily on bringing our imaginations to life. As films evolved, this posed a great challenge for early filmmakers.
And a great challenge for many modelers is the space in which they're working with. Here, Pele has a 6-foot space and he created this scene, which is pretty impressive. Another fellow modeler said, "It's neat, but I'd never use it. Photos are meant to be a document of a moment in time. This is just digital art." And I would disagree. All of the art is in the models, the scale train locomotive, the trees, the scenery, the crossing, everything that is done here. All he has done is eliminated the distraction that was in the background, that being the corner of his diorama. Another modeler points out and says it depends on why you're shooting, I guess. Manipulation like this voids any historical value of the image. I have to agree with so-and-so, but if this is what you like, go for it. Which would make me ask, with that perspective, how do you watch movies? That doesn't seem like proper ventilation.
I can't breathe in this thing.
I knew it.
Early on, simple camera tricks were used to make the impossible look possible.
And since Pele doesn't have 35,000 feet above his model, I think it definitely works. And one final modeler noted, "I think it's pretty cool, I'd use this, but if I posted the picture, I'd say the sky is Photoshop enhanced. It's just like when someone photographs their module outside and gets the real background and real sky." And this is where I'd push back one last time and say, when you go to a movie, they don't have disclaimers at the bottom of the screen saying, "Hey, he's on strings to make it look like he can fly." They end up doing the illusion to be able to give you the effect that they're going for.
I think we've had quite enough of this nonsense.
So everybody can hear.
Our end goal is always to create the most realistic scene as possible, and if it means getting rid of those lights above your railroad as well as a seam that might be in the background, kudos to you. I think selling the image for the modeling that you had done, that's what it's all about. You got to compliment the modeler. So Pele, phenomenal job on the work you do. Continue creating the stuff you create because it is what inspires fellow modelers. The naysayers that say,
"The background ain't real."
Take a hike and go pound some sand. Nicely done. Keep up the great work. Now let's be clear, I always try to actually get the photo in camera to be right. As I mentioned prior about distorting, you're trying to get that distortion out of a photo. That's a pretty simple technique. It's not anything overwhelming. Your phone actually has this already in it. So if you don't have Photoshop, you can open up your phone and go to the distortion tool. And this actually stretches out or pulls out that barreled effect that was given to you by the fisheye lens. I go to a 16:9 crop, end up getting myself a photo that turned out okay. I like this a lot better than this. So if you're sharing photos, go ahead and try to tweak it a little bit. Well, did you flex that Ford knowledge and guess the 4 millionth built car by Ford in Minnesota? Well, it was C, 1977, the LTD Landau.
Obviously.
The record production was 144,402 cars and trucks set in 1977. Speaking of tweaking, I ended up adding a few power lines to this week's thumbnail because I thought that's a detail that normally no modeler is going to add because nobody wants to reach in and out of all those wires. I also lightened the photo just a little bit, and as we mentioned prior, end up swapping out that background. Now we could have just put one solid white piece of paper back there or a faux background, but at the end of the day, you don't always have that space and room with another deck right up above there, or there's a reason why your background is the way it is. So knocking it out, replacing it, I don't think that's a crime. I think it's just enhancing the modeling that you had done. As you can see here, Bob had a lot of details. I think this makes the scene a lot more believable. It's a lot more enjoyable, and at the end of the day, it enhances the work that Bob did. He did the work, he did the foreground, all we did is swapped out the background. It's not a crime.
We get it. Settle down. You're okay with swapping the background.
And the one little subtle tint that I end up doing a lot of times on all the thumbnails is I put just a little bit of a soft yellow on it to make it look old. And there you have it. That's our thumbnail. To be able to start with the photo that we took at Bob's, just like we've got here, we went through that distortion process to clean it up a little bit, brighten it up, swapped out the background, put our little tint on it, added the graphics, and there's our thumbnail for this week.
Rail fanning with Rivard to go.
As this train rumbles its way towards the Ford plant, we pause a moment and take a look at the unique cars in the consist, like this 50-foot Gulf Mobile in Ohio. There's a 50-foot UP car. These cars are often carrying the parts and pieces that are going to be applied to the vehicle at the assembly plant. Now here's a set of auto frames, the frames that are going to be going on the Ford Ranger. They started to build those in 1985. They ended up being the #1 bestseller in 1987. This C&O car, again, is going to be carrying parts and pieces to the car for assembly. Same with this Norfolk and Western. It's just kind of neat to see some of those different cars in the mix. Often these cars are coming out of Detroit, and then they're going to work their way here to the cities to be assembled. The larger boxes are carrying the hoods, the trunk lids, the fenders, and that sort of thing. And then lastly, we've got here another Family Lines car. Just again, neat to see some of the mix and variety. Notice that they're not all just blocked in one lump sum, and that's often because they're putting them into the plant for specific uses and reasons. Now here's a Santa Fe auto rack that's definitely kind of unique and different. It's already previously loaded, so I don't know the story behind this particular car or possibly this last car. This CSX car, notice it's got the clamshell end on the back, and that's because they generally will put that at the rear to protect the back of the train so people aren't chucking things into the back of the car. Now the train would work its way up into this yard. This is the Ford plant up in the upper right corner here where we're looking at. That is where they'd be shoving the empty auto racks to be loaded. The overall yard has a lot of different reasons and purposes for what cars go where, but we're not going to dive into that now. Still just note that an auto facility, it's definitely a cool thing to model.
Here's the curmudgeon coming at you for the gripe of the week. The gripe of the week this week is about fellow modelers that are taking themselves just a little bit too serious. I mean, they look at a photo and they're like, oh, the sky's been photoshopped in. Would you rather look at the water heater or the washer and dryer in the background? Would that be better? Would that be more believable? Well, it's actually documenting things a little bit more accurately. Oh, I'm sure you watch Star Wars and wonder, how do those guys breathe out in space without oxygen masks? That's gonna really bother me. Well, I'm telling you right now, what bothers me is the fellow modeler that gets a little bit too excited about all the little details. Move on, and that's the curmudgeon's gripe of the week. Would you rather look at the water heater or the washer and dryer in the background? Would that be better? Would that be more believable?
A big thanks to everybody that watches to the end, that has hit like, hit subscribe, as well as made comments in the past. It's those actions that help share this content, so if you haven't checked out other episodes, feel free to do so. You can also check out the tour of the GN in 1970, as well as the past episodes of the GN in 1970.
70s.
Would you rather look at the water heater or the washer and dryer in the background? Would that be better? Would that be more believable?